The top 10 remains relatively stable, as half of the teams were idle here in this last weekend. I'm Matt Menson. Today is Monday, October 28th, and welcome to the Cornfield Sports Pod Rankings Show. All right. So we made y'all familiar with the way we announced these rankings last week. We're going to be sticking to the same formula. We're going to go 25 through 16. Then we're going to go to the top and end on the bubble at 15. So, beginning right now at number 25, remaining there for the second straight week, the Vanderbilt Commodores. They lost to Texas, who was ranked 5th last week. They did play a close game to them. I don't know. Well, I did not have them ranked in my poll. I don't know. Maybe the other folks that are doing the voting are showing a little SEC bias of their own, but we'll see how Vanderbilt continues to do. Playing close against Texas, and then of course beating Alabama as I did recently. It is respectable. Vanderbilt sits at 25th. At 24th in the rankings, the Illinois Fighting Illini. In the last week, they lost to top-ranked Oregon, got the brakes beat off of them at the Outson Zoo. If you thought this game was any kind of an upset alert, you should have paid closer attention to where this game was playing. The Outson Zoo is a very difficult place to play. Go ask Ohio State that. You don't just march into Eugene, Oregon and win games. So the Illinois Fighting Illini drop 4 spots in the CSP rankings. At number 23, brand new to the poll, the Colorado Buffaloes. I guess it is prime time. They are still competing for a spot in the Big 12 championship. They don't control their own destiny, but they are doing what they can to get there. They had a win versus Cincinnati in the late-night game on Saturday night, and it was enough to earn them a spot in our poll at the 23 spot. And that win against Cincinnati is still a respectable win. Cincinnati might not be a ranked team, but they are a winning record team, and until that loss, with a little bit of chaos, they could have competed for a spot in the Big 12 championship as well. Again, they didn't control their own destiny either, but with some chaos, they were not out of the running. At the 22 ranking, also new to the poll, the Washington State Cougars. They had a win at San Diego State, also in the late night time slot. San Diego State put some pressure on them, but Washington State ultimately did make it happen, and they are still only a one-loss team up to this point in the season. And at this point, any one-loss team's got to be at least considered for that poll. And they've given any team a run for their money. John Mateer is still looking like one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and that has earned Washington State the 22 spot. Moving up to 21, the Army Black Knights. They improved 1 spot from last week by doing precisely nothing. They were idle in the last week, and that was all they needed to climb in the rankings further. The undefeated Army Black Knights. At the 20 spot, the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss had a win versus Oklahoma. They actually let Oklahoma score points. in double figures. Not a great look for the Ole Miss defense. And at this point, letting Oklahoma score more than about 6 points is not a good look because Oklahoma has no offense whatsoever. Ole Miss was able to pull out a win. They didn't look great in this game. The offense should have been able to do more. Yes, Oklahoma has been riding their defense the entire season so far, and their defense is decent. Ole Miss is supposed to have an amazing offense, and they didn't look the part. So they don't not looking good in a loss to a dramatically inferior team drops them one spot in our poll. Dropping a massive 10 spots in the poll, though, at number 19, the LSU Tigers. They did not look the part against the Texas A&M Aggies, who they played. Texas A&M was ranked 17th in last week's poll, and LSU lost to them. LSU does not look like a top 10 team. This is LSU's second loss in the year, and LSU no longer controls their own destiny in the SEC. And that is where things currently stand. Meanwhile, Texas A&M can win out, and they do control their destiny in the SEC. And Texas A&M is looking better and better every week after that loss to Notre Dame to begin the season. But we'll get to them more in a little bit. Ranked number 18 this week, the SMU Mustangs. SMU had an overtime win at Duke. Playing at Duke is always goofy. They do weird things there. Duke pulls off wins that they shouldn't. They play teams tighter than the teams should be allowing Duke to play against them. And SMU climbed 3 spots in our polls. With that win against Duke, SMU, only a one-loss team. They've been looking solid. They have been looking very solid. Speaking of solid-looking teams from the ACC, at 17th in the polls, the Pitt Panthers. I had them higher in my poll. I think that undefeated merits a little bit more than 17th, but here they are. That is a 1-rank improvement from last week. After a dominant win against Syracuse where their defense scored 3 touchdowns. Yeah, that's right. Their defense scored 3 touchdowns. Their offense scored 20 points. Their defense scored 21. Their defense outscored their offense, and it wasn't in a bad offense kind of manner like you'll see from the team out east. It was the Pittsburgh Panthers just being absolutely dominant over a Syracuse team that's not bad when it comes to passing the ball. I mean, Kyle McCord knows how to get the ball to Pena and to Gadsden and to his guys. But that's the way things shook out for Pitt and for Syracuse. The Panthers just showed up in that home game against Syracuse, climbing the ranks here. At number 16 in our rankings, staying exactly in the same spot that they were last week, the Boise State Broncos. The Boise State Broncos had a win on the road at a team that we were talking about potentially being a G5 contender for that playoff spot. They do not look the part anymore. We're talking about the UNLV Rebels, and Boise State went to town on them. Ashton Genty is that guy. He is still my favorite for the Heisman. Sorry, Travis Hunter, you're not there. Ashton Genty is on pace to break Barry Sanders records. That's the truth of the matter, and you don't do that without being the best player in college football. Because if you're on pace to break records from the best running back of all time, it takes an absolutely astounding athlete to do that. At number 15. Oh, we'll get to that later. You thought I was going to change up the formula now? Did you? No. That was our 25 through 16. Vanderbilt, Illinois, Colorado, Washington State, Army, Ole Miss, LSU, SMU, Pitt, and Boise State. Now, to the top of the rankings. At number 1, to no one's surprise, and precisely no one's surprise, the Oregon Ducks, who are the unanimous number 1 in the Cornfield Sports Pod rankings. They had a dominant win against Illinois, who at the time was ranked 20th in the CSP poll. Illinois, as we previously mentioned, fell back to 24th, and the Ducks stay at number 1. At number 2, the Georgia Bulldogs. They were idle in the last week. You can make a case that undefeated Penn State belongs ahead of them. We did have a few of those votes in our poll, but not enough to overcome those that placed Georgia second in their poll. Georgia still riding strong after that win against Texas. And until they lose again, we're probably going to see them stick around that top spot, or that number 2 spot here in the poll. That said, with Ohio State and Penn State playing this week, that could change. We could see the winner of that game jump Georgia in the poll, and I wouldn't be shocked to see that happen in the coaches poll and the absolute joke that we call an AP poll. Yeah, why do you think we do this? AP poll is flaming hot garbage. At that 3rd spot, though, one of the teams I just mentioned, the Penn State Nittany Lions. They are undefeated. I actually had them at the 2nd spot on my ticket, but the Georgia votes beat me out. Penn State had a quality road win at Wisconsin. Camp Randall's never an easy place to win. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how bad Wisconsin is on any given year. They will always put up a fight. They put up a fight for a little while. They were beating Penn State early on. But the Nittany Lions, they came through. They are the better team. They are one of the most balanced teams in college football. And they are a team that, on the right day, in my opinion, can beat anybody. At number 4, as you probably guessed from my talk about the Ohio State-Penn State game and potential to jump up to that number 2 spot, we have the Ohio State Buckeyes. They were idle last week, and their ranking stays the same. We have had no changes in the top rankings thus far. These all remain in the same order as last week, and that trend continues at the number 5 ranking with the Texas Longhorns. Texas had a win at number 25 ranked in the last poll and in this poll, Vanderbilt, and that was not enough to jump them in the rankings, but there is no sense in punishing them for beating a ranked team either. At number 6, we go to the Miami Hurricanes with a win against Florida State. It's a rivalry game, which is the only reason this game means anything at all, because Florida State is not who they were supposed to be. DJ, you did not bring talent to that team. At this point, they could probably pull whatever kid from an average high school in Florida and have him do just about as well. as DJU had been, but FSU is done with DJU. They've benched him, and he has lost his starting job. Nonetheless, bringing in a new guy was not enough to beat the Miami Hurricanes. Cam Ward is still one of the best players in the country. He's looking at getting a spot in New York on Heisman Trophy Day. I still don't think he's going to beat out Genty. Some folks think he will. Some folks are wrong. But Miami continues to be undefeated. Continues to be absolutely dominant on offense, and not quite there on defense. They let Florida State score some points. Now, granted, some of it was garbage time points, but Miami looks to be following the formula of the 2019 LSU team, only they don't have quite that level of talent. Like, this isn't, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase that we're talking about that are on this team here. Cam Ward is not Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow was arguably the best quarterback of the generation. We really haven't seen anybody better than him at the college level. We're not talking about the NFL here, where he has been mid all year. But the Miami Hurricanes right now, currently sitting in that 6th spot and continuing to be a competitor, controlling their destiny for the ACC, and looking at a spot in the college football playoff as the ACC champion. At the 7th rank, we finally see a jump in the rankings. The BYU Cougars are your 7th ranked team in the Cornfield Sports Pod rankings. That is an improvement of 3 spots. They were the 10th ranked team last week. With the win over UCF in the bounce house, they dominated. If you look at that score, it does not show you just how dominant that game was. At one point, BYU was up 31-10 and just absolutely controlling that game. UCF scored more than half of their points in garbage time. BYU, very dominant, and with them being the only undefeated team playing in the Big 12 last week, it gave them the opportunity to make that jump to being the top-ranked Big 12 team, and that gives you the 4th of our top 4 conference champions according to our poll right now. So our top 4 conference champions, and these would be the 1 through 4 seeds in the college football playoff, are the Oregon Ducks, the Georgia Bulldogs, the Miami Hurricanes, and the BYU Cougars. Those are your 1 through 4 seeds who get the bye in the college football playoff. And the aforementioned 16th ranked Boise State Broncos are your 5th highest ranked conference champion. They would be your G5 entry into the college football playoff. Moving through the rest of the college football playoff field here. At number 8, also undefeated in the Big 12. Right behind the BYU Cougars, we have the Iowa State Cyclones. We got my boys sitting at the exact same spot they were in the ranks last week. No changes with the bye. And that is pretty much all to be said about them right now. They are preparing for that game against Texas Tech coming up this week. But no change for the idle Cyclones. Another team that was idle, though, here in the 9th ranked spot, they did drop a couple spots. The Tennessee Volunteers. The Tennessee Volunteers did, unfortunately, for them anyway, get penalized for being on the bye and not being able to procure a win. Having a loss on their schedule doesn't exactly help them either. But the Tennessee Volunteers are your 9th ranked team and our 3rd idle team in a row to get ranked here. One that climbed a spot and is 1 loss. Benefited from the bye week. The Clemson Tigers. They round out your top 10. They are the best primed team right now to compete with the Hurricanes for an ACC title. Yes, they are better equipped to compete for that ACC title than the Pitt Panthers. The Clemson Tigers are undefeated in ACC play. Their only loss is to Georgia. That's out of conference, so it will not affect whether or not they make the conference championship game. And Clemson, in my opinion, has looked like a significantly stronger team than Pitt. Their strength of schedule has been weak, not quite as weak as Pitt's, but nonetheless, it has been weak. But Clemson has been blowing the doors off of their opponents, where Pitt has not been doing that as frequently. After that Georgia game, it really looked like it put Clemson on a mission to go beat the brains out of anybody they played. And that is exactly what they've done. And that's good enough to get Clemson into the top 10 in this week's Cornfield Sports Pod rankings. We move out of the top 10 to the 11th ranked team. Our final team in the college football playoff is the Texas A&M Aggies. They just had a statement win over the 9th ranked LSU Tigers, which gives the Aggies control of their own destiny in the SEC. Not an easy thing to claim. And certainly no one expected it to be the Aggies that were making that claim. You would think, that it would be Georgia or Alabama or Tennessee or maybe even Ole Miss at the start of the season. That would be the team making that claim. That is not the case. The Aggies continue to roll, undefeated in SEC play with the win over LSU at Kyle Field. And we saw the damage in the poll that did to LSU. But at the time, we had LSU ranked as a top 10 team. We had them at 9th. And they fell drastically. Texas A&M rose. There's a 6-spot rise for the Aggies to earn the last bubble spot in our playoff. The 12th seed is taken by the Boise State Broncos, and our 12th ranked team is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They had a absolutely dominant win in a game that was technically at Navy, but it was a neutral site. This game was played at MetLife Stadium and not in Annapolis. But Notre Dame dropped a 50-piece on Navy, which was a team that maybe was not as good as advertised. They had been undefeated up to this point. Many people had this game on upset watch, and Notre Dame absolutely smoked Navy. Navy, as you're aware from listening to the earlier part of the rankings, fell out of our rankings as a result of this game. They are not the team that they appeared to be, and now we unfortunately won't get the excitement of undefeated Army versus Navy in the AAC championship game to determine a conference champion right before the playoff committee, who makes their final playoff selections, which actually takes place before the regular season Army-Navy game. We could still get Army-Navy in the AAC championship game, but it wouldn't have quite the same effect as if the two teams were undefeated. The next team outside the bubble. This team, they got a win. It was a good win against Washington. And yes, they did drop a position within our rankings. The Indiana Hoosiers. the Indiana Hoosiers did drop within our rankings. Not what I had on my ballot, but I can't make excuse for the math. We're just totaling points here. We're totaling ballots that are added together. It's 7 ballots, and that is what the totals brought out to. But Indiana is looking good. They are the Indiana Hoosiers are 8-0, and mind you, their coach was at James Madison last year, who started the season, was it 10-0, 11-0, something like that? He's now the first coach to go 8-0 in consecutive years at 2 different schools, which is one of the most impressive coaching feats I've ever seen. Being the first to do anything is impressive. Being the first to go 8 games into the season undefeated at 2 different schools in a row, it's hard enough to do that at the same school when you're keeping your players, keeping your coaches, same training facilities, all of that stuff, same administration behind you. When you got all of that stuff changing around you and still being able to, compete at that level, that's a whole different brand of impressive. Indiana is looking like a strong team. At number 14 in our rankings, improving 1 spot, the Alabama Crimson Tide with a 34-0 win over the Missouri Tigers, who were ranked 24th in last week's rankings and are no longer ranked, as you might expect, in the Cornfield Sports Pod rankings. I still don't trust Alabama with 2 losses. They're not the quality of team that we saw under Nick Saban. This team is not as disciplined. We saw the jump shot nonsense. It's not as disciplined under Kalen DeBoer. They're still competitive, but this team, I don't think they make it into the SEC championship. And right now, I don't think they're on pace to make it to the college football playoff. Now, will the committee put them in because brand? Possibly. But the majority of college football fans are getting a little tired of the babying of Alabama when they're not as good as advertised. And this is one of those years where they are not as good as advertised. We're only a few weeks out from the AP having them at number 1, and then they got beat by Vanderbilt and dropped off, and then they got beat again. So that's where we're at right now at number 14, and then at the 15 spot, the Kansas State Wildcats. They dropped 1 spot. They are the last team here to be announced in our polls. So if your team didn't get announced, tough luck, win more games. Maybe you'll get it next week. K-State, they did drop 1 spot after their win against the Kansas Jayhawks, a game in which Kansas looked better for the majority of the game. K-State looked like they didn't really want to be there. Avery Johnson did not know how to step up in the pocket. Instead, he ran backwards and got himself into unnecessary sacks. Wasn't throwing the most accurately. K-State did not look like a winning team, and they found a way to have a higher score at the end. It wasn't a good look, but in terms of Big 12 standings go, it means they do still control their own destiny because they have that head-to-head with Iowa State at the end of the year. If K-State wins out, then they do still go to the Big 12 championship game. Talking about K-State possibly beating Iowa State, it makes me throw up in my mouth. Oh, roll clones. But that is today's episode of the Cornfield Sports Pod rankings. Give the Cornfield Sports Pod a like and a follow. Find us on X at C Sports Pod. Of course, you can find me at SF Matt ISU. Of course, find Blake at BlakeAttack1846. And then you can find the other guys who are part of this week's Cornfield Sports Pod poll at Turney Taman, at Jay Monarch, at Ute Probs, at Not Stanley 4330, at ATX Caleb, and that is the Cornfield Sports Pod Rankings Committee for Week 10. But that will be all for today's episode of Cornfield Sports Pod Rankings. For Blake Peterson, I'm Matt Menson, and this has been the Cornfield Sports Pod.